Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. Tonight we focus on Sri Lanka, an island nation in the Indian Ocean, a neighbour of India and a country sinking in Chinese debt. This story is for the people of Sri Lanka. They've been suffering for months now. The price of everything has shot through the roof. There's been talk of quote-unquote bankruptcy of the government. India gave them a $1 billion line of credit recently. The IMF has given Sri Lanka 16 bailouts, second only to Pakistan. But the ruling family of Sri Lanka keeps going back to China to seek more Chinese money and to push their country deeper into Chinese debt. We're talking about the Rajapaksas. They control the country and the government. As of today, Sri Lanka's external debt stands at over $45 billion, but their reserves are less than $800 million. It seems like an impossible gap to bridge. How will Colombo do it? It has deployed the army on the streets after people started dying waiting for fuel. The situation is extremely dire, and that's an understatement. On Gravitas tonight, we'll bring you the full story. Picture this. Long power cuts, an acute shortage of food, long lines at petrol stations, factories shutting down, people dying on the streets, troops deployed in cities. Sounds like Ukraine, doesn't it? Except it's not. I'm not talking about Ukraine, I'm talking about Sri Lanka tonight. All of what I just said is happening in Sri Lanka. The country is facing an economic Armageddon. People have taken to the streets. Take a look at this. If you can't do it, go home. Gota, go home. Gotabaya, go back to America. These are the slogans being chanted. The Rajapaksas used to be Sri Lanka's most popular leaders. Today, they're facing the worst protests since coming to power. Sri Lankans want them out. They're angry. And the reason is an economic meltdown. They're struggling to make ends meet. And this crisis has been on for months now. It's going from bad to worse. In the last 72 hours, at least 4 people have died waiting in queues. They wanted some petrol. They died waiting for it. Now, the army has been deployed at petrol stations. The situation is really bad. It has triggered an exodus of Sri Lankans. 6 of them were caught entering Indian territory. When asked why they were coming to India, they said they cannot afford to live in Sri Lanka anymore. How did things come to such a pass? How does Sri Lanka plan to deal with this crisis? In the next 4 minutes, we'll try and explain. First of all, let me tell you how bad the situation is. The cost of everything has shot up dramatically. Food prices have gone up by 25%, medicines by 29% just this month. And I'm talking about basic medicines like paracetamol. Drug prices are set by the government, and the government of Sri Lanka has approved a 29% hike in medicines. But the worst hike is in fuel prices. Petrol up by more than 43%, diesel more than 45%. And you know how this works. When fuel costs more, everything costs more. So what explains these steep hikes? Shortages. There's a shortage of everything, it seems. So much so that schools have called off exams because they do not have enough paper for students to write on. At petrol stations, there are seemingly endless queues, tens of thousands of people lining up for hours. 4 of them, like I just told you, died waiting. Let me repeat that. They died in queues waiting for petrol. No wonder there are protests.
We didn't come here asking to develop the country or any such thing. We can't live anymore. Because of the skyrocketing cost of living, we can't manage with our salary. We came to remove this government and bring a government that will help us.
It is very difficult for the people to live today. Even the wealthy are finding it difficult. An ordinary person can't even think of making a live income. The Rajapaksas only think about their family. Nobody has suffered like this. The Rajapaksas have only one trump, that is racism.
The people of Sri Lanka are angry with the Rajapaksas and they're showing it both on the streets and on social media. Look at this tweet. It is from President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. He expressed condolence on the death of 132 passengers in China. We told you about that plane crash yesterday. All these people died. Now look at the responses to his tweet. Each and every one of them asks the same question. What about the death of 4 Sri Lankans, those who died waiting for petrol in a queue? Why are people blaming the Rajapaksas for Sri Lanka's crisis? Because this family runs the government. Let me show you the government's book of accounts. Sri Lanka's dollar reserves are down to less than 800 million. This is as of last month, 800 million. How much do they need? Around $6.6 billion, and that's this year alone. What for? Debt payments, among other things. Now let's tell you how big Sri Lanka's debt is. $26 billion. That's how much money they have to pay in the next 4 years between 2022 and 2026. Sri Lanka has to pay $26 billion to creditors. This is principal plus interest. Now, do you see the gap? How will Colombo pay $26 billion when it has just $800 million? It will borrow. From whom? China. The favorite creditor of the Rajapaksas. They keep pushing their country deeper into Chinese debt. Colombo has sought $2.5 billion from Beijing, $1 billion in loan and $1.5 billion as a credit line. Now, China says it is offering help on quote-unquote competitive terms. But Sri Lanka wants more. It wants China to restructure all loans, and China remains non-committal on that front. What is the restructuring of a loan? It's basically modifying the terms of a loan, renegotiating the deal so that the borrower, in this case Sri Lanka, can avoid a default. China has not agreed to this. But despite all of this, Sri Lanka is borrowing more from China. Look at their record. Since the pandemic began, Sri Lanka has taken $2.8 billion from China. Now they want another $2.5 billion, so more than $5 billion in 2 years. This is over and above another $5 billion. This loan was meant for infrastructure projects. All in all, Sri Lanka has taken more than $10 billion in loans from China. The country's total external debt is said to be more than $45 billion. What is the plan to repay these loans? Sri Lanka has already lost a strategic port to China, the Hambantota port. It could lose more assets if it fails to pay. And this is a classic debt trap. Colombo is in such dire straits, it is shutting down embassies to save costs. As of now, they've decided to shut 2 embassies in Iraq and Norway and 1 consul general's office in Sydney, Australia. They will stop operations from the 31st of March because their government does not have the budgets to run them. And the government, like I said, is controlled by one family, the Rajapaksas. The president is a Rajapaksa, Gotabaya. The prime minister is a Rajapaksa, Mahinda, the president's older brother. The finance minister is a Rajapaksa too, Basil Rohana, the third brother. The eldest of the Rajapaksa siblings is Chamal. He is the minister of irrigation. Then you have the prime minister's son, Namal Rajapaksa, minister of youth and sports. One family runs this country. How much of Sri Lanka's budget do they control? According to one estimate, 75% of Sri Lanka's budget is controlled by the Rajapaksas. What have they done with this control? Pushed their country deeper into debt. In 2007, the Sri Lankan government began borrowing heavily. Guess who was leading the government at the time? The current Prime Minister, Mahinda Rajapaksa. He was president in 2007. What Sri Lanka borrowed in 2007 makes up 38% of its foreign loans today. 15 years ago, Sri Lanka was caught in a debt trap. Now it is sinking further. How will they get out of it? The only viable option is an International Monetary Fund bailout, an IMF bailout. So far, the IMF has bailed out Sri Lanka 16 times, 1/6. This is second only to Pakistan. Islamabad has sought a bailout from the IMF 22 times. If Colombo seeks IMF's help again, this will be bailout number 17. IMF officials have visited Colombo in recent days. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the president, says he wants to work with them.
Yesterday's discussion with the International Monetary Fund was also held for this purpose. Through those discussions, we hope to find a way to pay off our annual loan installments, sovereign bonds, and so on. Subsequent to my discussions with the International Monetary Fund, I have decided to work with them after examining the advantages and disadvantages.
I have decided to work with them, says President Rajapaksa. He chose his words carefully there. No mention of the word bailout. The opposition believes it may not happen at all. They say an audit might expose some skeletons in the Colombo closet.
If there is a proper audit done on Sri Lanka, especially the Defence Ministry in Sri Lanka, Defence Ministry has the largest amount of budgetary allocations in the country. And even as parliamentarians, when we ask for information pertaining to expenditure details of the Defence Ministry, we are told that we can't have that because that is a threat to the national security. And there is so many allegations of corruption there. So if the IMF comes in, I'm very much sure that they might do a comprehensive audit on most of the ministries. And maybe the government is afraid of large-scale corruptions being exposed.
So which way will the Rajapaksas go? They need to decide, and they must do it fast, as Sri Lanka might inch closer towards bankruptcy and start defaulting on its debts. In Ukraine, meanwhile, it is day 27 of Russia's invasion. The blitzkrieg has clearly failed, so Vladimir Putin has switched to plan B. Pound Ukraine into submission. Russian bombs are not just hitting Ukrainian buildings, they're also hitting Ukrainian morale, and that's what Putin is counting on, it seems. First, let's track the fighting. These satellite pictures should give you an image. They show the city of Mariupol. Huge columns of smoke can be seen rising from buildings. Craters mark where Russian missiles fell. Clearly, Mariupol is a prize for Putin. If he gets Mariupol, he can complete this land bridge. He will control the Sea of Azov. Putin's first step was to besiege the city. No luck. The residents continue to resist. Step 2 was a dire warning: surrender or face a barrage of rockets. Again, the Ukrainians were resolute. So now Putin has moved to step 3. Take a look at this. So far, Mariupol has resisted, but how much longer? Food and medicines are running low, so is morale. Aid agencies say all routes into the city are blocked. Clearly, the siege of Mariupol is entering its decisive phase. So is the battle for Kiev. On Monday, more rockets pounded the Ukrainian capital. The target? This shopping center. Take a look at what's left of it. Piles of debris, twisted metal and blocks of concrete. 8 people were killed in this rocket strike. Was this a legitimate target? Well, technically, no. A shopping mall is not a military asset. But Russia says it was housing rocket launchers. And like all Russian claims, there is no proof. Nonetheless, Kiev is tightening security. The mayor has announced a 35-hour curfew. Fewer people on the streets, fewer the casualties. That's what Ukraine is hoping for. But it's not a permanent solution. Curfews cannot be endless. Sieges cannot run forever. So both Putin and Zelensky need a political solution. And I know what you're thinking. Putin can win this war. So why does he need a peace deal at all? Because the victory is coming at a huge cost. Let me show you an example from Kherson. It's a city in southern Ukraine. It was captured by Russia on the 3rd of March. But the residents of Kherson are pushing back. On Monday, they organized protests. They demanded the Russian occupiers to withdraw. In the end, Russian soldiers cracked down. They used tear gas and warning shots. Monday's protest was dispersed. But the next one may not be. What's happening in Kherson could be a template, a sneak peek into Russian occupation. So Vladimir Putin is shifting to his backup plan, use his military advantage to strike a deal. Because let's face it, Ukraine is not winning this war. At best, they can hope to delay the Russian advance. So Zelensky has agreed to a peace deal, but he does have one condition. Any concessions made by Ukraine will be subject to a referendum.
To be honest, the issues of security guarantees We are talking here about constitutional changes, change of Ukrainian law. Whatever happens, this will not be decided only by the president. It is a long process which will be decided by the parliament and by the Ukrainian nation.
В будь-якому випадку буде вирішуватись не тільки президентом.
Where does that leave Vladimir Putin? For now, he seems to have ruled out regime change. Instead, he's focusing on a political settlement. Now, we've told you about his major demands: neutrality for Ukraine, recognition for Crimea, recognition for Donbass. Will Ukraine accept these demands? Zelensky has accepted the principle of neutrality. He realizes that NATO membership is not happening. But what will Ukrainian neutrality look like? Will it be a Swiss model, the Austrian model, or the Irish model? Zelensky says none of the above. He is pushing for a Ukrainian model of neutrality. That model requires security guarantees. Countries must promise to defend Ukraine's sovereignty. The question is, who is going to step up? Zelensky's choices are clear. He wants guarantees from Turkey and Israel, but both countries are soft on Russia. Plus, one of them is also a NATO member. That's Turkey. The second disagreement is on Donbass and Crimea. Russia wants Ukraine to recognize these regions. Donbass is independent. Crimea is part of Russia. Well, here too, Zelensky is willing to concede, but not immediately. He's open to discussing Donbass, he says, and Crimea after Russia pulls out. Sort of like a Minsk III agreement. But will Putin agree to that? He justified this war by claiming to liberate Donbass. His biggest military gains have been in the east. Will Putin sacrifice all of them? This question is also holding up the peace talks. And don't forget the sanctions. Any peace deal will require a rollback of sanctions. Just one problem. The sanctions have not been imposed by Ukraine. They've been imposed by the West. So America will also have to sign off on any peace deal that happens. And right now, they do not look interested. The West is more focused on shipping weapons, on funding an insurgency. A peace deal is not their priority. Because of that, the talks are lopsided. You have a rampant Russia on one side and a desperate and lonely Ukraine on the other. Each airstrike is putting more pressure on Volodymyr Zelensky. Each bombing is pushing him towards a peace deal. So Putin may not conquer or occupy Ukraine, but he still holds the advantage. And who knows, perhaps that was plan A all along. And talking about plans, not all of them succeed. Some backfire quite badly. Just ask Joe Biden. He had this whole thing mapped out. Russia would invade, the world would unite in criticism, and he, Joe Biden, would lead it. Unfortunately, his plans have all failed. His West Asian allies are neutral, his European allies are going it alone, and his Pacific allies are caught in the crossfire. It's another Joe Biden speciality. On Monday, he also addressed India's position. Joe Biden called India's response to Russia, quote-unquote, shaky. Listen to this.
In response to his aggression, we presented a united front throughout NATO and in the Pacific. The Quad is, with the possible exception of India being somewhat shaky on some of this, but Japan has been extremely strong, so has Australia, in terms of dealing with Putin's aggression.
You can understand Biden's confusion. He's used to lackeys, not partners. He expects India to firmly support America's position. So far, that has not happened. India has put her priorities first. That's not shaky. That's self-interest. And Joe Biden should know this. For decades, his country has put self-interest first, invaded sovereign states, toppled regimes, supported dictators for oil. So if Biden wants shaky, he can look at America's own moral standing. That is shaky. And this could have long-term implications for the US. You see, geopolitics is like a wolf pack. Everyone follows the alpha, the dominant one. For nearly 3 decades, America was that alpha. But now that perception is changing. First Afghanistan, now Ukraine. America is not the invincible superpower anymore, so its allies are looking out for themselves. Take Europe, for instance. On Monday, EU ministers adopted a new document. It's called the Strategic Compass. 3 things stand out in this document. Number 1, a pseudo-European army. By 2025, Europe will create a 5,000-strong force. Where will they deploy? Any crisis zone or hotspot in Europe. And guess who's taking the lead? Germany. They are planning to provide around 2,000 soldiers. Now, technically, this plan is not new. EU battle groups have existed since the year 2007. But those were nominal. They never saw any military action. This one is bigger. It's well defined. And most importantly, it's a direct response to Russia's aggression. Number two, it permits mini coalitions in the European Union. You see, the EU works unanimously. It's like every member state has a veto. And this makes decision-making impossible. On Russia, on China, on nuclear energy, getting 27 countries on one page is not easy. But this new document has found a solution. It permits coalitions within the EU to react. Suppose France and Germany want a military operation. Poland and Hungary do not want it. Normally, that would be the end of discussion. Well, not anymore. This document permits France and Germany to create a mini coalition, and this mini coalition can conduct military operations. The EU Council will oversee. Takeaway number three, more emphasis on mutual assistance. EU members are promising to defend each other by all means in their power, they say. What does that mean? Sanctions, diplomatic pressure, even military response if needed. Put together, what does this document reveal? There is no need to speculate. I'll quote their words, their own words. We aim to become a more assertive security and defense actor by enabling more robust, rapid and decisive action, including the resilience of the Union and our mutual assistance and solidarity. In simple words, Europe is taking charge. It is not blindly following NATO anymore. Now, this change will take time. 72 years of cooperation will not disappear overnight, but Europe is moving in that direction. Leading that charge is the French president, Emmanuel Macron. He wants a proper European army, a Euro-centric foreign policy, a Euro-centric defense policy. And now he's got a willing partner. Germany is planning to spend $110 billion on their defense. Joe Biden can see all of this. So this week, he's traveling to Europe. He will attend a NATO summit in Brussels. He will also visit Poland to take stock of the war in Ukraine. Frankly, it's too little too late. Every institution has a time and place. NATO was built for the 20th century. It was built for the Cold War. And since then, its relevance has reduced. Biden can try to revive this alliance. But he's better off focusing on the Indo-Pacific. That's the more important battleground, we say. Plus, his odds look better. Australia, Japan, South Korea, they're all 100% committed to the United States. Biden can capitalize on that. But he needs to act fast again because Russia and China are already making moves. On Monday, Russia ended talks on a World War II treaty with Japan. These talks covered disputed islands in Japan's north. Japan claims them, Russia controls them. The talks were stalemated for decades. But now Russia has officially broken them off. The reason? Because Japan sanctioned Russia for the war. Prime Minister Kishida has criticized Russia's move, but his worries are bigger. What if ending the talks is just step one? What if Russia joins China's piracy campaigns in the Indo-Pacific? Like I said, Joe Biden has a choice to make here. Does he focus on rebuilding transatlantic ties, or does he invest in the Indo-Pacific? Here at least, shaky responses won't cut it. Well, here's another reason why Biden's statement reeks of double standards. Despite the sanctions, the American sanctions, American banks are still transacting with Russia. In fact, they're enabling Russian debt payments. Reports say JP Morgan Chase helped Moscow settle their dues recently. This is after the US government granted a temporary license for such transactions with Russia. And now India too is exploring alternative ways to do business with Russia, to transact with Russia. What are the options? Our next report tells you.
Last week, there were fears that Russia could default on its debts. But just in the nick of time, the payments were made. Russian bondholders got $66 million on Monday. How did that happen? Haven't Russian banks been sanctioned by the West? Effectively, Russian banks remain cut off from the global banking system, but the United States has kept a door open. A temporary license was issued earlier this month by the US Treasury Department. It allows certain Russian transactions to go through, like sovereign debt payments. Russia seems to have used the same mechanism. Moscow sent the payments to an American bank, JP Morgan Chase. JP Morgan Chase then forwarded the payments to Citigroup, which then paid the creditors. Some reports suggest Russia may have used assets to make recent payments. The temporary license has allowed Russia to avoid a default so far. Moscow has paid 2 interest payments on sovereign bonds, but the American license is a temporary one. It expires on the 25th of May. A report claims the license can be extended, but for that, Washington may need Moscow to make a major move towards de-escalation. The White House may have declared Russia a global economic and financial pariah, but Wall Street banks are hesitant to completely shut the door on Russia. Names like Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs may be winding down operations, but they plan on retaining their Russian banking licenses. Despite the sanctions, American banks have kept their transactions with Russia going. But countries like India will still have to find alternatives. 3 weeks ago, Indian exporters were waiting for payments worth $500 million from Russia. The transactions were blocked by sanctions. Western sanctions have cut off 7 Russian banks from SWIFT. That's short for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. SWIFT is a mechanism for cross-border payments. Indian banks, too, rely on SWIFT to settle international transactions. So, even though India has not sanctioned Russia, Indian business with Russia has been hit. India needs alternatives, other ways to transact with Russia. Perhaps do business with smaller Russian banks, which are yet to be sanctioned. In the past, India and Russia have used their local currencies to settle payments. India can consider integrating the Unified Payments Interface, or UPI, with the Russian financial system. If American banks can still do business with Russia, India should have no reason to stop. Bureau Report, World is One.
And now we turn to Pakistan. Pakistan is celebrating Islamic unity as we speak. And this is as its own government stands on the verge of disintegration. Lawmakers are leaving the ruling party of Pakistan, Imran Khan's party, the PTI. Opposition leaders are clashing with the government. The army is preparing for a confrontation, and the Human Rights Watch has warned of anarchy, a complete collapse of Pakistan's democratic institutions. But for the next 2 days, Imran Khan has chosen to ignore these grim realities and trumpet his achievements on combating Islamophobia, a problem which he says is spreading all over the world, besides China, of course. We'll discuss that in a bit. First, the details of what's happening. Islamabad is hosting the 48th session of the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC. It is an intergovernmental organization. It has 57 Islamic countries as members. It was founded in 1969. This body calls itself the collective voice of the Muslim world. It says it works to safeguard the interests of the Islamic community, quote unquote. Pakistan is a founding member of this bloc, the OIC, also the chair for this year's proceedings, which is why this conference is being held in Islamabad. The theme is Partnering for Unity, Justice and Development. The attendees are foreign ministers from all member nations, plus delegates from observer nations. They will all be in Islamabad until Wednesday and pass resolutions on a host of things, like the challenges being faced by the Muslim world, the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan, the political crises in Libya, Sudan and Syria, the problems plaguing Islamic countries in Central Africa, also the evolving conflict between Ukraine and Russia, all of this. But like always, the agenda has been colored by Pakistan's Kashmir obsession. Prime Minister Imran Khan delivered the keynote today. He raked up the Kashmir issue again. He said the Islamic world had failed the people of Kashmir despite being 1.5 billion in strength. Listen to this.
Honorable Foreign Ministers, we have failed both the Palestinians and the people of Kashmir. I'm sad to say that we have been able to make no impact at all. They don't take us seriously. We are a divided house, and those powers know it. We are 1.5 billion people, and yet our voice to stop this blatant injustice is insignificant. We are not talking about conquering some country. We're simply talking about the human, the human rights of the people of Kashmir and Palestine?
This anti-India tirade is hardly surprising. Ever since the first OIC summit of 1969, Pakistan has repeatedly used this platform to internationalize the Kashmir issue. It hasn't had much success though. Many OIC members side with India and reject Pakistan's narrative on Kashmir. And it's expected to be no different this time, especially because of the blatant hypocrisy of Pakistan. Do you know who else is attending the OIC summit? Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, the same China which is persecuting Uyghur Muslims, locking them up in camps, subjecting them to forced labor and state-sanctioned rape. Did Imran Khan talk about any of this? Did he remind the OIC about its failure to help the Uyghurs despite being 1.5 billion in strength? He did not, and he will not, because Chinese money is keeping his country afloat. Uyghur Muslims are calling out Pakistan's hypocrisy though, also the silence of Islamic countries on their plight. The World Uyghur Congress issued a statement. It says China's presence at the OIC conference undermines the organization's credibility and international standing. Allow me to quote from what they said. The presence of a Chinese government representative at the OIC Council of Foreign Ministers reflects China's coercive influence amongst Muslim-majority governments. If the OIC strives to be a trustworthy voice of the Muslim world, it cannot continue to close its eyes to the suffering of millions of Uyghur and other Turkic Muslims in East Turkestan. And why just Uyghur Muslims? The state of minorities in Pakistan itself is no better. As OIC leaders deliberated on Islamophobia in Islamabad, an 18-year-old Hindu girl was shot dead in Sindh. That's because she refused to convert and marry her abductor. This is the same story that plays out every few months in Pakistan. Girls from the minority community are abducted, forced to convert, pressured into marriage, and then killed if they refuse. Watch all our reports on Pakistan's minorities in the last few years and you'll know what I'm talking about. As for Imran Khan, a leader who cannot patch differences in his own country, a leader who is facing a rebellion in his own party, and a leader who has chosen China's money over China's Muslims, he cannot, in our opinion, further the cause of Islam or Islamic countries. The talkers, we say, have gone to Pakistan. The investors have come to the other side of the border. This is actually one of the jokes we shared earlier today while drawing up the story list for the show tonight. Here's the context. Ahead of the OIC meeting in Pakistan, a high-level business delegation from the UAE landed in Kashmir. And they weren't alone. Delegations from at least 33 international companies from Saudi Arabia, Hong Kong and the United Arab Emirates arrived in Srinagar to explore business opportunities and invest in the valley. Our next report tells you why this is significant.
A 40-member delegation from the United Arab Emirates has now landed in Kashmir. Delegates from Saudi Arabia have arrived too, and so have representatives from companies in Hong Kong. In all, representatives from 33 foreign companies have arrived in Kashmir. They are all attending the Gulf Business Summit. It is being held here in the valley. A land whose sheer beauty has enchanted many through history. To some, including 13th century poet and singer Amir Khusro, Kashmir is heaven on earth. He once said, "If there is a heaven on earth, it's here, it's here." Kashmir is the land of the serene Dal Lake, the magical Gulmarg, Pahalgaon and Sonmarg. But for the longest time, this land was hijacked by unrest, raided by violence and locked down by cross-border terrorism. In 2019, the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi revoked the special status of this valley. And Kashmir was given equal status and put at par with the rest of India. The erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir was bifurcated into two union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. The Union Territory has been opened up for investment in tourism, food processing, agriculture, horticulture, handicrafts, real estate, IT and medical colleges. In January, Jammu and Kashmir signed MOUs or Memorandums of Understanding with several Emirati businesses. In February, India and the UAE signed a free trade agreement. Duties were cut on nearly 90% of goods, with non-oil trade expected to touch $100 billion in 5 years. It is March 2022, and for the first time in 3 years, business delegations have arrived in Kashmir. They are travelling to different parts of the valley, exploring business opportunities, looking for scope for investment. The delegation has brought with them a change in perception. They are carrying with them the banner of socio-economic transformation. This is the Lieutenant Governor of Jammu and Kashmir, Manoj Sinha, ushering the delegation through Kashmir's colourful enterprise.
It's not just the investment that happens, there's also a lot of geostrategic importance of investment from the GCC countries. Global investment coming in from GCC countries is what we should be looking at, because the European and American countries or Japan will come much later compared to the GCC.
This headline-making trip is telling the world that Kashmir is safe, that it is an attractive investment destination. The government of India could not have asked for a shinier badge of honour, and Pakistan could not have imagined a situation more grim. Prime Minister Imran Khan's government is drowning, and so is Pakistan's economy. The country is crying for cash. Money is now being poured not too far away from Pakistan's border, and it's happening in a land Islamabad wrongly claimed and has tried to destabilize for a generation now. Here's what's worse for Pakistan. The investment is coming from the same Muslim countries that Pakistan repeatedly approached to denounce India's Kashmir policy. This visit shows how Kashmir has transformed in just a matter of 3 years.
Staying with India, earlier today a report was released on global pollution levels. It said New Delhi was the most polluted capital city in the world, that its pollution levels exceed the global safety limits. Goes without saying that is a serious problem in India, and in Delhi air pollution is a big challenge that the country faces, and that's a fact. But have you ever wondered what comes up? Who comes up with such reports rather? The companies that compile the data on pollution levels, which are these companies? The report I'm talking about tonight has been compiled by IQ Air, a Swiss company which also designs and sells air purifiers. So we must ask, what's behind this report? A legitimate concern for the environment or a business model to sell more products? Our next report tells you what I'm talking about.
For the second year in a row, New Delhi has been ranked as the world's most polluted capital. The PM2.5 concentration in the city's atmosphere is way above the globally accepted safety limit. In 2020, the concentration stood at 84 micrograms per cubic meter. In 2021, the figure rose to 96.4 micrograms per cubic meter. This is a 14.6% increase in just 12 months. What's worse, this figure is 20 times higher than the safety limit of 5 micrograms per cubic meter set by the WHO. That's not all. The report says that 11 of the 15 most polluted cities in Asia are also in India, the other 4 being in Pakistan. None of them meet the WHO's air quality standards. Interestingly, this data has been published by IQ Air, a Swiss air quality technology company which also sells air monitoring and cleaning products. Last we checked, this company was trying to expand its market in India by launching several new products in the Indian market. They range from anywhere between 50,000 rupees to over 1.5 lakh rupees. Now consider this data. In 2020, India's air purifier market was worth $74.8 million. In 2021, it grew to $85 million. And by 2027, it is projected to grow by $565.7 million. Reports say this indicates a growing awareness among consumers regarding the efficacy of air purifiers. What shapes this awareness? Is it based on credible inputs from users or simply on reports on pollution levels by air purifying companies? Most scientists say that air purifiers at best supplement air quality in homes. Since most homes have enough leaks to allow air circulation, air purifiers have a limited utility. Studies also show that there's little medical evidence to prove that air purifiers really help reduce respiratory problems. So there's reason to be skeptical here. Air pollution is indeed a challenge in India. But are private companies profiting from this crisis through their reports on pollution levels? Are their reports a tool to push and promote their products in the Indian market? These are questions we must ask. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
You just saw how the skies of New Delhi look on a normal day. Now let me show you how its roads look on any given day. This is how bad the traffic is. It's the same story in Mumbai, Bengaluru, Pune, Hyderabad, Kolkata. Basically, Indian roads are almost always jammed. Traveling during office hours is a nightmare. You have to be extremely lucky to not be late. So it becomes bad press when a food delivery company announces a 10-minute delivery plan. Zomato dared to do that. On the 21st of March, CEO Deepinder Goyal took to Twitter to announce his ambitious plan, 10-minute food delivery coming soon, he began. Food quality 10 on 10, delivery time 10 minutes. Name of the service, Zomato Instant. Almost instantly, Goyal was flagged with questions and memes. This one, for example. Even instant noodles take more than 10 minutes to cook. How exactly was Zomato Instant planning to deliver complicated recipes in 10 minutes? What about the logistics? At what speed and what kind of vehicles will the delivery partners be driving to deliver food at such lightning speed? Zomato was prepared for these questions. Its PR team had carefully drafted the announcement. This is what it said. Before we even talk about this, we will start with a clarification. To fulfill our quick delivery promise, we do not put any pressure on delivery partners to deliver food faster. It's a very safe claim, except it does not add up. Either Zomato is promising a 10-minute delivery with no plans of delivering on this promise, or it is expecting riders to risk their lives to ring the doorbell on time. Zomato cannot claim to have both the head and the tail of this coin. Either way, this announcement shines light on a dangerous race. I'm talking about the race for delivering food and commodities at record speed. It all began with a pizza brand promising a 30-minute delivery. If the pizza reached a minute late, it was free. A domino effect followed. In 2019, Zomato came up with the same offer, 30 minutes or free. The pressure for delivery was put on the riders. They had to make it to the finish line on time. Here's what one rider told the media, and I'm quoting, "I'm given a maximum of 5 minutes to reach the restaurant, 5 minutes to pick up orders, and 5 minutes to deliver orders at the customer's location." What happens in these 30 minutes is nothing short of fast and furious or a road rash. Wrong turns are taken, traffic signals are broken, there are dangerous overtakes and absolutely no regard for safety. Ask any Indian who drives and she will tell you to beware of food delivery bikes on the roads. These riders are racing against time. If they don't make it in 30 minutes and if the customer complains, they will likely be penalized. Zomato wants to up the thrill game. It says 30 minutes is too slow. If we don't make it obsolete, someone else will. That's what they're saying. 2 years too late, we say. In 2020, an app called Zepto started a 10-minute grocery delivery experiment. Zomato's primary rival Swiggy then extended the same offer. So Zomato jumped to invest in a grocery delivery platform called Blinkit, which too is promising a 10-minute delivery. And this is basically a race for who rings the doorbell first. What happens in this race, how many lives are put at risk is nobody's business. FYI, there were more than 300 accidents involving delivery riders between January and August 2021 alone. Number of fatalities, 36. Less than a week ago, a delivery boy was killed in Hyderabad. At least 400 others went on strike. Instead of addressing such risks, companies want to up the stake, position themselves as the platform of choice for a generation looking for instant gratification of their cravings. Today, India's food services market is worth $65 billion. By 2025, it is expected to become $110 billion. Online delivery platforms account for around 7% of this pie. We are talking about some $4.2 billion. Each player is racing for the biggest slice of this pie. Leading the 10-minute instant delivery game is their best shot at winning this race. And this is happening in a country where emergency vehicles never arrive on time, where real help, critical help, is never in a hurry to reach on time. It takes an average of 25 minutes for ambulances to arrive in rural areas of India, up to 12 minutes for the police or an emergency vehicle to arrive at an accident site in India. More than 80% of accident victims in India do not get medical care within the first hour. This is where we need on-time service delivery. This is where we need more players to compete for prompt service, because honestly, the food can wait. A 10-minute delivery is neither logistically possible nor desirable. We don't mind waiting at restaurants. So why should we mind waiting in the comfort of our homes? It makes sense that Zomato does not want to be the one left behind in the Insta-commerce race, though. It took a hit during the pandemic, remember? Its IPO failed massively. So for a company that spearheaded the food delivery boom in India, Zomato Instant is a chance at redemption. Its best shot at dominating the sector once again. But I'm afraid 10-minute food delivery is not palatable. We'll wrap the show with that. Leave you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.
Ahora con las manos hacia arriba.